Well, good morning, aspiring wonks and scholars of all repute. Welcome back. The daily briefing is hitting the ground and running again. We had a nice winter break. I hope everyone else did. But Congress is back in session. We are back in session. So let's get straight to business today. Let's see. The single most significant domestic piece of news is that Obama has announced the expansion of background checks for gun purchases. The president says that these moves that he's going to take through the form of executive action are going to help curb gun violence and that they're also consistent with the Second Amendment. Now, Obama is expected to announce these moves today to expand background checks for gun buyers and tighten rules for people who purchase some of the most dangerous weapons. He's going to do this by bypassing Congress on this very hot button issue. So let's frame this. If Congress makes the laws and the executive branch is charged with enforcing those laws, how can the president do this? Well, administration officials say the executive actions are consistent with existing statutes, that's laws, and clarify how laws already on the books are going to be enforced. That's how. The president who enforces the laws has a lot of discretion in how to choose to enforce those laws. So, Attorney General Loretta Lynch says, "It is not where you are located, but it is what you are doing that determines whether you are engaged in the business of dealing firearms." So, through executive action, the president is expanding the term. Hey, I got mail from the Men's Warehouse. 60% off designer trousers. Not a bad idea. I could probably use some new pants. But anyway, the point is that the way in which the law is being enforced is going to be stricter. The president is going to try to close this loophole about gun shows. People are buying guns at gun shows by considering those individuals dealers, and therefore that will require background checks on people who buy guns. So we'll see what kind of response and fallout there is on this point. Meanwhile, we're now less than a month away from the Iowa caucus. A super PAC backing Mr. Cruz has begun airing television spots that question whether Mr. Rubio is serious enough to be president. And Rubio took a shot at fellow Republican Ted Cruz by calling him an isolationist. So, those two are in a battle trying for second place, really. And Donald Trump, who still tops the polls, put out his first political ad, which really doubles down on his campaign rhetoric so far. On the Democratic side, Bill Clinton has hit the campaign trail for Hillary. He debuted on behalf of his wife, depicting her as the most seasoned candidate in the field. And Jeb Bush is really making his stand in New Hampshire, and some new campaign commercials from him, and Chris Christie with some tough talk in New Hampshire as well. So that puts into perspective what's happening in Iowa and New Hampshire, which will be 1 week after Iowa, just over a month away. Let us turn our attention to foreign policy, where sectarian tensions in the Middle East are deepening as Saudi Arabia and some of its allies, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, are joining their ally in the rift with Iran. Well, let me talk for a minute about what has happened here. Over the weekend, Saudi Arabia executed 47 individuals that they considered engaged in terrorist type activities or supporting terrorist actions, and they executed these 47 people because that's what Saudi Arabia does. Well, one of the people that they executed was a Shia. Saudi Arabia, a Sunni-dominated country, executed a Shia cleric, an imam. Now, Iran, a Shia-dominated country, was very unhappy about this execution. And when protests erupted in Iran, the Iranian regime, the government, failed to protect the embassy, and the embassy was stormed, attacked, ransacked, and burned. And so, in response to the attacks against their embassy, Saudi Arabia has cut diplomatic ties with Iran. This poses a conflict for Saudi Arabia's Western allies and for the United States in particular. First, we can relate to an embassy being attacked in Iran. If you go back to 1979, the Islamic regime, at the time they were revolutionaries, well, they attacked our embassy and took all those hostages. So we kind of got a soft spot for attacks against our embassies in Tehran. With that being said, Saudi Arabia is our ally. Iran, we're trying to, well, we've already brokered a nuclear deal with them, so we want positive and good relations with them as they are about to be granted $100 billion in relief from sanction aid. And so we want to be getting along with them. And so here's the situation. You have the Iranian regime who fails to protect the Saudi Arabian embassy. The Sunni nations that are allied with Saudi Arabia are increasing their tensions with Iran, breaking off diplomatic relations. And you got the United States saying Iran is in compliance with the nuclear deal because they recently turned over some low-grade enriched uranium to Russia. Meanwhile, they were in violation of UN agreements that they're supposed to follow to not be testing missiles, especially ballistic missiles, which puts them in violation of the current nuclear deal. So what are we doing? What's the Obama administration's response? Well, they're claiming Iran is John Kerry is claiming Iran is satisfying its obligations under the nuclear deal. And we're making phone calls to these countries. Hopefully somebody will pick up the phone and listen to our pleas for them to get along. So pay attention to this, follow it carefully and closely. I think you're going to see some interesting developments there. So what's Congress up to? The House is back in session. The House committee that's investigating the 2012 terrorist attack in Benghazi, Libya, is interviewing former CIA chief David Petraeus and former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta today. So those are pretty big names. The U.S. Justice Department has sued Volkswagen on Monday. Why? Well, they're seeking billions of dollars in penalties against Volkswagen for cheating on auto emissions. We'll pay attention to that as well. And on one other piece of news that I think is important to note, Sweden as well as Denmark have begun enforcing tighter border controls as it pertains to the influx of asylum seekers from Syria and Iraq. All right, it's going to be pretty wet out there today, so stay dry. Go Falcons.